Role of nation state and state sovereignty. Syllabus questions you'll need to answer at the end of this subtopic. Examine the role of sovereignty in assisting and impeding the recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples. 1. First, need to know what sovereignty is. This was covered in your human rights topic. 2. Need to know how sovereignty is a limitation and alternatively a crucial tool in assisting the international community in regards to the promotion of human rights at large. This was covered in your human rights topic. Then you can extend this to explain how it specifically acts as a limitation tool for the recognition of Indigenous peoples' rights. Keyword being recognition. Rehash: what is sovereignty? States, the basic unit of the international system, the only entities in international law capable of exercising full political capacity, sovereignty, supreme power or authority. Therefore, state sovereignty, ultimate lawmaking power of a state, allows states to be independent and free from external interferences in its affairs. State sovereignty is a source of a state's legal and political power to make laws over its own population and to enforce these laws. Ethical issues over freedoms and rights of individuals within states therefore arise in this use of state sovereignty as a defense against such critiques. Impact that the state sovereignty has on human rights, whether there is recognition, protection, or enforcement of such rights. Charter of the UN 1945 acknowledges that all states are fundamentally equal. Article 2.1 states the UN is based on the principle of the sovereign equality of all of its members. Hence, this provides significant limitation to promotion of human rights. Since state sovereignty forms the very foundation of which human rights are based on, and thus the choices of states may potentially enable despite conflicting with other fundamental human rights on individuals. International law is often created by other states and hence often in the interest of other states, which have to be balanced with the interest of the international community and all individuals to provoke as little resistance as possible. Indications of tensions between state sovereignty and international law. Violations to international law is considered to be a premise that states are conflicting with the rules of other states. Hence, view arises of international law paradoxically undermines state sovereignty. Therefore, promotion of international law is often done to persuade states rather than enforce the rules on them. Now, Indigenous peoples. The nation state and the state sovereign can both assist and impede in recognition and protection of rights of Indigenous peoples. Exclusive sovereignty of nation states focuses an entire system of international law. Therefore, the idea of sovereignty being held by nation states alone puts Indigenous peoples at a vulnerable position. Issue of legal recognition of Indigenous peoples was traditionally seen by the international community as a domestic issue for the relevant national state. Some nation states use their state sovereignty to introduce domestic legislation and institutions to afford the Indigenous peoples' rights. Case study: the Sami people in Sweden. Sami people inhabit territories in Sweden, Norway, and Finland. In 1993, Swedish government established the Sami Parliament of Sweden via the Sami Parliament Act 1992, where the legislation states that the parliament's primary purpose is to monitor issues that relate to Sami culture in Sweden. Sami Parliament is an elected body, representatives voted by Sami people. Limitations: that the parliament is more so like a government agency or a consultative body, since it sits 3 times a year. Permanent, limited mechanism for consultation on indigenous issues relating to culture and language cannot compel the Swedish government to pass specific laws or policies. Numerous occasions when Sweden's peak legislative bodies have simply ignored the Sami Digi. For example, in 2008, ignored requests for Sami Digi calling for formal recognition of Sami in the Swedish constitution. Sami parliaments also exist in Norway and Finland, but since Samideg cannot enter into international negotiations or instruments, the Swedish, Norwegian, and Finnish parliaments are not obliged to honor or codify any agreements reached between indigenous parliaments. Therefore, effectiveness of these bodies is dependent on the political will and state sovereignty of Sweden, Norway, Finland's representative governments. This demonstrates that the role of nation states and state sovereignty can play in assisting/impeding the recognition of indigenous peoples' rights. Further notes on Sami people: Sami Parliament also exists in Norway and Finland, but since Sami Digi cannot enter into international negotiations or instruments, the Swedish, Norwegian, and Finnish parliaments are not obliged to honor or codify any agreements reached between the indigenous parliaments. Therefore, effectiveness of these bodies is dependent on the political will and state sovereignty of Sweden, Norway, and Finland's respective governments. 2008, Swedish Ombudsman against ethnic discrimination noted semi-parliament lacks real political influence as shaped through participation in decision-making, the right of co-determination in legislative matters, the right of veto in administrative decisions, or the status of compulsory referral body in matters that concern the Sami interests. Another independently researched case study you can do is on the Lakota peoples of America. So, examine the role of sovereignty in assisting and impeding the recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples.